Hi, Mr. Godfrey here. Now that we've looked at the properties that we need to understand and keep separate when we're adding and subtracting fractions as opposed to multiplying and dividing fractions, let's do a few examples. On this example sheet, we will have some mixed numbers that we have to deal with. You remember previously we talked about there's two ways that we can deal with the mixed numbers. We can either separate the integer part and the fraction part and deal with them separately, or we can take that mixed number and turn it into its improper fraction form. I'm going to choose the latter of those two. And we need to do that, or we have to do that when we're doing multiplication and division, so I'm just going to keep everything the same and do it while I'm adding and subtracting as well. So taking a look at our first example, we have two mixed numbers. So the first thing we'll want to do is to turn those mixed numbers into their improper fraction form. So the first number, 5 and 5/9, becomes, 9 times 5 is 45 plus the 5 is 50 over 9 as an improper fraction. Minus the second fraction is 3 times 8, 24 plus 7, 31 over 8. So I now have their improper fraction form. I notice that the denominators are not the same, so I'm going to have to determine the least common multiple of the denominator numbers, which are 9 and 8. So counting by 9s and counting by 8s, what's the first number we come to? Now, if we have to prime factor it, we will. So we'll go ahead and do the prime factoring here so we can get the least common multiple. And when we do that, we'll notice that I don't have anything in common as far as there are no 3's with the 8 prime factors and there are no 2's with the 3 prime factors. So I'm going to have to multiply all of these together, which means I'm just going to have to multiply 9 and 8 together, which is 72. Now I know some of you probably came up with that without doing the prime factor, but again, that prime factoring is a tool that we'll use when we don't recognize the least common multiple. So 9 times 8 is 72, so my least common multiple for my first two fractions is 72. So my common denominator is going to be a 72, so I can go ahead and write those. Now what I need to look at is this 9 denominator from the first fraction. I need to multiply by some number to get the 72, which was 8. And in a fraction, we have to multiply the numerator by the same thing in order to keep an equivalent fraction. So 50 times 8 then is 400. The 8 was multiplied by 9 to get 72, so the numerator needs to be multiplied by 9 as well. 31 times 9 is 279. So now that my denominators are the same, my answer is going to have the same denominator, because you remember we don't touch the denominator once it's the same when we're adding or subtracting, and then we simply add or subtract the numerator. So this is 400 minus 279, which is 121. I would then look to simplify this fraction if I could. In other words, is there a common factor for 121 and 72? And there is not, so 122 over 72 is my final answer. Now, I do not want you to, or do not require you to turn this back into a mixed number if this is an improper fraction. You can go ahead and leave it just like that, because we're just simplifying expressions. We'll talk about in a later video, in a later concept, when we would change this to a mixed number as opposed to leaving it. But for this worksheet and for this assignment, we're going to leave all fractions as improper fractions. Simply make sure that they're reduced before you give me your final answer. So we'll go ahead and take a look at number 2 then. Now with number 2, I want to look for improper fractions and turn those into, look for mixed numbers and turn them into improper fractions. And then I also want to simplify any double signs. Double signs are two signs that are next to each other like this. I want to turn those into the proper sign. In other words, I want to distribute that negative sign and turn that into its plus sign. So I have negative 4/5. And then I'm going to have negative times a negative, which makes that going to be plus now. And then I want to turn this into its improper fraction. So 11 times 1 plus 1 is 12 over 11. I now have my improper fraction form for this. I now need to find a common multiple. The least common multiple in this case is going to be 55. So my denominator for both fractions is going to be a 55. So both of these numbers need to be changed. The 5, in order to get 55 by multiplying, is I need to multiply by 11. So my numerator I need to multiply by 11 as well. So that's negative 44. This fraction I need to multiply by 5 to get the 55. So I need to multiply my numerator by 5 as well, which is 60. Now that I have the common denominator, I may go ahead and add these. My denominator answer is going to have the same denominator as the originals because we're adding, we don't touch it. And then we're going to simply add these two numbers. So 60 minus 44 is 16. I would then look to simplify this fraction if I could. It doesn't simplify any further, so 16 over 55 is my final answer. I'm going to do one more example so you get the idea, and then you can tackle your worksheet. Looking at number 10 down here, we have a mixed number to begin with, so we'll want to change that into its improper fraction form. So 2 times 7 is 14, plus 3 is 17 over 7, and the fraction is still negative. And then I have this negative times a negative, which makes that positive, and then I have 5/3. I then need a common denominator because I'm adding these two fractions together. My common denominator is the least common multiple of 7 and 3, which is going to be 21. I need to multiply 7 by 3 to get 21, so I need to multiply my numerator by 3 to get to keep the fraction equivalent. So this is going to be 3 times 10 is 30, and 21 is 51, and the fraction is negative, so it stays negative. And then to get 21 with 3 multiplying by 7, I need to multiply my numerator by the same thing. I now have common denominator, which now I can add these fractions. My denominator is going to have the same fraction. My fraction is going to have the same denominator, and then negative 51 and 35 is negative 16. I would then look to simplify this fraction if I could. It doesn't simplify because I don't have any common factors, so I'm finished with this problem. So to wrap up adding and subtracting fractions then, a few things we want to remember. In dealing with mixed numbers, there's two ways to deal with them. We've chosen to change those change those mixed numbers into their improper fraction form. So we're going to do that first. Next, we want to make sure that all our fractions have the same denominator because we're adding and subtracting. If they don't have the same denominator, we need to determine the least common multiple, and that's going to be the denominator. We then need to change all our fractions into fractions that have that same denominator, and we do that by multiplying each fraction by a number that gives us that denominator, making sure we use that same number for both the numerator and denominator. Once we have the denominators all the same, the answer is simply then adding or subtracting all of the numerators, and then our denominator of our answer will be the same denominator as the fractions because we do not touch the denominator when we're adding and subtracting fractions. So that wraps up adding and subtracting fractions. In the next video, we'll take a look at multiplying and dividing fractions.